Good evening. Let's try this again. Good evening. Is Hillary here yet? Is Donald? I heard that they were both trying to avoid the debate tonight, so I thought if they were smart, they would be coming to this lecture. So I want to compliment all of you on your good decision to be here tonight, knowing that no matter what craziness goes on, by the time you get home tonight, it will already be on YouTube. So we're not missing anything. My name is Jean Quam. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, and on behalf of the college and the Tucker Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the annual Fall Distinguished Lecture. So thank you again for being here tonight. Since its inception in 1993, established as from a very generous endowment from U of M alum and 1945 CEHD grad, Dr. Dorothy Tucker, the Tucker Center has fulfilled its threefold mission: to conduct research on the impact of sport in the lives of girls and women, to provide first-rate educational opportunities for students, and to engage in community outreach and public service. The Fall Lecture Series brings all parts of this mission together by creating a public forum that allows the best and the brightest scholars and educators from around the globe to share their insights and expertise on important and timely issues related to women's involvement in sport. Tonight's distinguished lecture is no exception. I want to just acknowledge the fact that the Tucker Center brings extraordinary recognition both to our college and to the University of Minnesota. The work that is done here is not matched anywhere else in the world, and we're extremely proud of the work that they do. So before we get started tonight, each year the Tucker Center awards the Edith Mueller Scholarship winner. The purpose of the Edith Mueller Park and Recreation Memorial Award is to acknowledge the important contributions of undergraduate students who are pursuing a degree in recreation, park, and leisure studies, and encourages them to deepen their commitment to the profession. This award also honors the memory of Edith Mueller, a U of M Parks and Recreation major before her untimely death in 1982. To present the scholarship winners tonight is Dr. Connie Magnuson, the director of the School of Kinesiology's Parks and Recreation program. So Connie, you want to join us up here on stage?
Thank you, Dean Quam. Harrison Kane has a love of sports. He grew up playing sports at his local Parks and Recreation program. Having this opportunity has made a huge impact on his life and how he wants to spend it and his chosen degree. Harrison is a double major in Recreation, Park, and Leisure Studies and Sports Management. He plans to work in the Twin Cities park system to be able to provide the types of recreation opportunities he had growing up and to promote strong, healthy communities. We'd like to congratulate Harrison tonight on being the recipient of the Edith Mueller Scholarship.
Congratulations. And I'd like to recognize and say a warm thank you to Edith Mueller's mother, Mike Mueller, and to her sister, Carrie Fritzie. And if you take a minute, they've got a great picture of their granddaughter. Granddaughter? Great-granddaughter?
My great-granddaughter.
Great-granddaughter, all decked out in Gopher gear. We thank you for all of your generous support that you've given to the Tucker Center over the years. Now it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Mary Jo Kane. Professor Kane will serve as the moderator this evening and will introduce tonight's distinguished speaker. As many of you know, Dr. Kane is a director of the Tucker Center. She received her PhD from the University of Illinois with an emphasis in sports sociology. Professor Kane is an internationally recognized scholar who has published extensively on sport and gender, particularly media representation of women's sports. Professor Kane is the recipient of the first endowed chair in the nation that relates to women and sport. the Dorothy McNeil Tucker Chair for Women in Sport and Exercise Science. She is also a past recipient of the Scholar of the Year Award from the Women's Sport Foundation. In 2015, Professor Kane was named one of the top 100 most influential sport educators by the Institute for International Sport. Most of us who know Mary Jo know that she's one of the most influential. I was trying to think of the direct quote, because I've said this to many other people and I've probably misquoted you. But Dr. Kane gave one of the best quotes I've ever heard on the death of Pat Summitt. And if I butcher it, you can correct me. But shortly after Pat Summitt passed away, and I think it was with a New York Times reporter, Mary Jo said, if there's a Mount Rushmore for women's sport, Pat Summitt and Billie Jean King are already there. And that touched me and was a terrific quote. Professor Kane has appeared on the Today Show and has had her research cited in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mary Jo Kane.
Good evening, everyone. Before I introduce our distinguished speaker tonight, there are some individuals I'd like to acknowledge because they've worked really hard behind the scenes to ensure that this evening will be a success. First, University of Minnesota undergraduate students who are doing directed studies in the Tucker Center this semester, Alexa Jane Hodel and Lindsay Druger. Tucker Center graduate students and invaluable members of the Tucker team, PhD students Anna Baith and Caroline Heffernan, and as always, Jonathan Sweet. Needless to say, we could never succeed in our mission without the support of so many people also around the University of Minnesota. Obviously, one in particular is Dean Jean Quam, who has been a steadfast supporter to us in so many ways. I also would like to thank, as others have, and to acknowledge publicly the Muellers, because without support, and they have been with us from day one, 1993, I would not be and we would not be here tonight without the Muellers. So I'd like a round of applause for the Muellers. I also would like to acknowledge in the audience tonight former and current regents, Regent Dave Metzen and Peggy Lucas, who are right over here. And also I would like to give a warm Minnesota welcome to the first Tucker Center event I am assuming he's ever been to, and that's our new athletic director, Mark Coyle, who's up there in the corner. Welcome, Mark Coyle. And finally, I'd like to give a shout out to the WNBA champions, the Minnesota Lynx, who, thank God, are not playing tonight. They're playing tomorrow night at the Tucker Center, where they will, at the end of the evening, have Target Center. The Tucker Center is a little small. At the Target Center, where after tomorrow night, they will have yet another WNBA championship. So go Lynx. As Dean Quam mentioned, the purpose of our lecture series is to explore important and timely issues related to women's sports. One such issue that has reemerged over the last few years is the precipitous decline in the number of female coaches 2 generations removed from Title IX. 90% of all head coaches in women's sports nationwide prior to Title IX were female, and today it's 43%. This employment trend has led to a puzzling and profoundly alarming paradox. While women's participation is at an all-time high, the number of female coaches is near an all-time low. Our speaker tonight is going to examine these key issues and all other things behind this paradox, and she will do so while focusing on one central question. How is it possible that as each new generation of females becomes increasingly involved in women's sports, they simultaneously become less qualified to enter the coaching profession? In sum, where have all the coaches gone, and why does it matter? Tonight's distinguished speaker, Dr. Nicole LaVoi, is well positioned to answer this important question. Through her groundbreaking research, as well as the unique partnerships she has established with grassroots and advocacy organizations such as the Alliance of Women Coaches, Dr. LaVoi has emerged as the nation's leading voice on this topic. She is a senior lecturer in the School of Kinesiology in the area of social and behavioral sciences, and she is also the co-director of the Tucker Center. She has published extensively on the occupational landscape for female coaches, authoring numerous research reports, scholarly journal articles, and book chapters, and the recently released book, Women in Sports Coaching. An award-winning teacher and sought-after public scholar, Dr. LaVoi was recently named one of the top 6 women in the sports business world you should follow by Yahoo Finance. She serves on the board of directors for the Alliance of Women Coaches and is a member of the teaching faculty at the NCAA Women Coaches Academy. Dr. LaVoi is also well positioned to address these issues because, in addition to being a first-rate scholar, she also has real-world experience as both a player and a coach. Dr. LaVoi was a collegiate tennis player and second academic All-American at Gustavus Adolphus, where her team won the Division III championship in 1990. She parlayed her love for tennis into a career in college coaching, first at Carleton College, and then as head coach at Wellesley. Due to her experiences at this prestigious all-women's school, Dr. LaVoi became interested in the role of gender and education, particularly as they impact female athletes. In fact, central to her life story is her deep commitment to making a real difference in the lives of girls and women within a broader sports context. So in 1998, she left coaching to return to her native Minnesota and pursue her PhD at the University of Minnesota. And I know I speak for many when I am very glad that she did, because the rest, as they say, is history. Please join me in giving a warm Minnesota welcome to Dr. Nicole LaVoi.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. So I get to tell you a story tonight. It's a true story, and it's a story of a paradox that affects girls and women in sport. Now, I said paradox, not parody, so this is not a comedy story. It's really not a laughing matter. The facts I'm going to share with you are bizarre enough that you might label it a science fiction story. And some think the data is pretty scary, and they might say it's a horror tale. But I can assure you that it's a drama, a real-life drama, that's unfolding right before us. So I want you to just sit back, settle in, turn off your phones, and I'm going to tell you how this paradox started. The paradox started in 1972 with the passage of Title IX. Title IX, if you don't know, was a federal civil rights law that made gender discrimination in educational contexts illegal. And what that included was opportunities for sport participation for girls and women. So what was illegal was what was afforded to boys in terms of sporting opportunity was now to be afforded to girls. And what we know from the data is that it dramatically altered the participation landscape for girls in sport at every level of competition. Now, you can still see here that boys outnumber girls, but that's a different talk. So what I want you to focus on is that we do have record number of female sport participants at the high school level and also at the collegiate level. The trend is also similar at the Olympic level. And the success and dominance of our female athletes on the podium in Rio, some attributed to the passage of Title IX. So often in the Tucker Center, you will hear Dr. Kane say that in 2 generations, we've gone from girls hoping there was a team to girls hoping they'd make the team. Now, we used to actually say in 1 generation, but because we're both getting older now, we have to say 2 generations. So I had to alter that a little bit. So this is the good news. This is the great side of the paradox in this story, is that we have record participation for girls and women in sport. On the flip side of the paradox, we have a dramatic decline in women in sport leadership. Now, I too benefited from playing sports as a young girl and as a college coach that was mentioned. But what we know, and this some people call that this is an unintended consequence of Title IX, is that there was a dramatic and now stagnant representation of women in positions of power in sport, and particularly for the purpose of tonight, female coaches. So our colleagues, Vivian Acosta and Linda Carpenter, over the last 35 plus years have been tracking the percentage of women in positions of power in sport. And thank goodness they did, because I think this data is really compelling. So when you look at this, I often get the question, well, what happened in the first 10 years? Why the dramatic drop-off? And there's a lot of factors, but for the sake of time, I'll tell you about one. So where that arrow is in 1978, that was the mandatory compliance federally for Title IX. So in 1972, when we start the graph, colleges had about 2 women's teams at every institution on average. By 1978, they had 6. So there was a dramatic expansion of women's sports teams in the early days. And so one could argue that because Title IX had just been in effect, that there might not be enough women coaches to coach all these new teams. Therefore, we hired men, okay? Now, I don't know if that's exactly true, but what you need to know is women weren't being fired, although maybe a few were, and they weren't leaving in droves. It was a rapid expansion. Now, even if you wanted to believe that argument in the early days, that there weren't enough qualified and interested women to coach, it certainly doesn't explain the continual decline and the last 10 years, the stagnation. So as Dr. Kane said, how is it possible that when we have record numbers of female sport participants with vast sport experience, lots of athletic capital, and a real passion for sport, that we somehow have a scarcity of women to fill those positions? So what I'd like to add to our saying in the Tucker Center is that in 2 generations, we've gone from women dominating the coaching landscape to women occupying a minority status. And that is the true coaching paradox. And this is occurring within a backdrop in other sectors in which women, the percentage of women is on the rise. Women in college coaching women's teams is the exception. Now, we still have some room for improvement in those bottom sectors, but I think this is a really stark contrast. This scarcity and underrepresentation of women coaching women is even more compelling when you look at the data for women coaches of color in divisions 1, 2, and 3. So the data that you see here at the bottom are coaches of color. Now, these include men and women coaches of color. So I can tell you that within those circles, women of color are the minority of coaches. And it's so drastic that recently the NCAA Board of Governors passed a resolution to try to change this and shift these numbers upwards to recruit and retain women of color and specifically women coaches of color. So that's really good news. So what I find also interesting as part of this paradox is that in other sectors, gender and ethnic diversity is a business imperative. It's valued. It helps the bottom line. It improves the workplace climate. So clearly, sport is lagging behind. So I've set up the paradox for you. So when I talk about this issue, which I do a lot, I get 3 questions, and maybe you have some of your own, and we're going to have Q&A at the end, so you can write them down. I'll be happy to try to answer them at the end. But I get 3 kind of key questions. 1, why does it matter? Why do we care about women coaching? Second question, why do we still have an underrepresentation of women coaches? And what has influenced that trend? And 3, what are we going to do about it? So the rest of the talk, I'm going to address those 3 key questions. So let's start with the first one. The first question is, why do women coaches matter? Why should we care that there's a scarcity of women coaches in college athletics and pretty much at every other level? The data in the high school and the youth level is no rosy picture either. So that's also part of the paradox, is that it's just consistent across all levels of competition as well. So we have some women breaking glass ceilings. Dean Quam mentioned the 3rd and final presidential debate tonight. Now, regardless of your politics, seeing a woman running for president matters. It matters because it challenges our conscious and unconscious bias around women, gender, and leadership. So when we see a woman running for the most powerful position in our country, the same thing is true when we see women as coaches in sport, which is also a very powerful social institution in our society and really around the globe. When we see women in positions of power, they're visible role models, they are aspirational to young girls, they help boys and men see women leaders differently, and I can actually think of no better coaching role model who dominates her profession, who's a real pro, who's an advocate for women in sport, and is a role model for all of us than our very own Cheryl Reeve. So let's give it up for Cheryl. Cheryl, you're not here, are you? I didn't see her walk in, but I know this is, if she weren't prepping for the big game tomorrow, I know she would be here because this issue around women and coaching is something that's near and dear to her heart. So why do women coaches matter? We know from the research, like I said before, it matters to girls, it matters to boys, it matters to the workplace environment, it matters to other women in the workplace. And what we know from the research is that when women are coached by women, they're more likely to go into coaching. And I love this picture of Muffet McGraw, who's the head women's basketball coach at Notre Dame. She's crouched down there. The 4 women sitting behind her, 3 of the 4 played for her at Notre Dame. So this coaching tree is really interesting. And we know that women are powerful role models. And so I'd once again like to see those women dominating the coaching landscape. So what I'd like to do real quick is have all the women coaches, if you have coached and you are no longer coaching or you're currently coaching, and maybe if you're aspiring to coach, please stand. Go ahead. Nice. Let's give these women a hand. Oh, stay standing. Okay. You matter. We need you. We need you to recruit other young women, and we need you to stay in coaching. So thank you. Thank you for the difference you make in the lives of the young men and women that you coach. And I can tell you the reason why I'm standing up here and the reason why I do the work I do with coach education and raising awareness and doing research and stimulating dialogue and trying to create social change is because of you. I know that you matter. I see the difference you make in the lives of your athletes, and it really is important. So I am here for you, and I see some familiar faces in the audience, so thank you for what you do. Second question. So I hope we've put to rest why women coaches matter. I sometimes kind of get irritated that I have to answer that question, but I do it anyway because we let the data tell the story. That's part of the story, and we know it does matter. So second question, why do we currently have an underrepresentation of women coaches across the board? Now, the short answer is it's complicated. It's really complicated. And when reporters call me asking this question, they want a soundbite. They don't really get a soundbite. They get sort of an education themselves because it is complicated. So luckily, we have a little bit of time tonight to unpack that. But the long answer is, you can read my book. We're not selling copies tonight, so you can't walk out with one. But if you are interested, I know there's a few in the audience who have persevered and picked it up and read it. I do have some discount flyers for you if you'd like one. So that's enough of my shameless self-promotion. All right, so what we're going to do is frame this as pitfalls. And pitfalls and barriers. And I think pitfall is nice because a lot of times women coaches are facing things that they don't know about, that are unseen and are dangerous to their career trajectory. So in the book, I propose this model. And the reason why I have a model is because there is a lot of research around women in coaching. I'm not the first, nor will be the last or only one to do work in this area. There are decades of research around this. And so what I wanted to do is take all of what we know and place it in a framework so we can actually try to create real social change. And what I really like about this model is the individual coach is at the center of the model, and she is nested within these systems that influence her perceptions, her attitudes, her behavior, her career choices. So she doesn't exist in a vacuum. And we'll talk more about that later. And another part of the model is that depending on one's intersectional identities, she will have a very different experience within the occupational landscape of coaching than a male counterpart or another female that has a different intersectional identity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So let me just bring this to life, because it's one thing to have models, theoretical models. It's another thing to kind of give you a flavor of what this really looks like in reality. So I picked women's basketball because we're talking about the Lynx, and women's college basketball is arguably kind of the most visible, popular college sport for women. So if you have a female basketball coach with various levels of intersectional identities, you might have a pregnant or parenting coach. We have Brenda Fries, our Big Ten colleague in Maryland. You have Dawn Staley at South Carolina, who's a black women coach. You have Stephanie Wheeler, who's a differently able coach, who's the head wheelchair basketball coach at University of Illinois. And then you have Stephanie White, who recently left the WNBA and is one of the only out lesbian coaches and just took over for Vanderbilt. So these women, even though they're women, they have very different experiences within the occupational landscape based on their intersectional identities. So we're going to start with societal and go in, and then we're going to talk about what we do. So societal level barriers and pitfalls are numerous, and they're really hard to change. And so I'm going to grab my glasses here, because to bring this model to life, I'm not just going to cite research. I want to read some quotes from female coaches from different research projects I've done, or from the women that I interact with the Women Coaches Academy or give talks with around the country, because I think it really brings it to life. So stereotypes around women, gender, and leadership collide when women have to balance what it means to be female and what it means to be a leader and coach. Societal assumption that being competent and being a leader are synonymous with men and masculinity. Research often call this the double bind. Women have to balance conforming to one's dominant gender role, which is for women being nice and quiet and caring and nurturing, with being competent, assertive, tough, and take charge, and acting like a coach, behaviors that are often associated with men and masculinity. So one head coach recently told me that a male supervisor told her that she was intimidating and too strong for a woman. Another coach said, in my experience, I think female coaches are held to a much higher standard, specifically when it comes to off-the-field issues. There's an underlying expectation that we take over the mother figure, which can interfere with our coaching and can have negative impacts on our jobs when we don't fulfill that role. So women of color, I'm kind of going down the line here, but women of color face a triple bind. They're women, okay, and they're African American or women of color, and they face racism. And racism is a belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities that are specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race. So black female coaches often tell me that people believe that black females are more suited for playing sports and being an athlete than for coaching and being in leadership positions. In terms of the maternal bias and the mommy penalty, a college coach told me recently, I was talking to another head coach in our conference who was asking me what my future plans are. And I said, I love what I'm doing, but I hope to be a head coach someday. He said, oh, you don't want to do that. It's too time-consuming. Shouldn't you be thinking about starting a family? The bind here for mothers is that then when they do start a family and have kids, they're immediately perceived as less committed and less competent and less suited for the coaching role. So they're also in a similar bind. Here's an example of sexism. A female high school coach was told recently by a male colleague, "You're too pretty for coaching." Another high school soccer coach told me just this week that her male colleague said to her that she needed to smile more. This is why truth is way more interesting than anything I can make up. In a study done by Alyssa Norris, my former graduate student, she interviewed assistant Division I women's basketball coaches who self-identified as lesbian using a minority workplace outcomes framework. One participant who was an out lesbian in high school and an out lesbian as a college athlete and went into the coaching ranks, played for a coach who told her that when she went on the recruiting trail that she needed to look less gay. Her pseudonym was Avery, and she explained that her experiences with homophobia led to her departure from coaching. Avery said, I could blame it on the profession and how tough it is, the demands, the travel, stuff like that, but really it was personally. I wasn't happy. I was just at a place where I didn't have support. I didn't feel like I could be me. I was definitely caught in, this is my job and my passion, and I love what I'm doing, but I'm not living. I'm not living, and I felt really trapped. Unfortunately, Avery's experiences, she's not the exception. So the lesbian assistant coaches in Alyssa's study acknowledged that while the climate is shifting, that they were still met with intolerance and discrimination that negatively affected their mental health and identity performance. In terms of ageism, there really is very little research and data around ageism in coaching for women. There's a kind of a common belief that it's going on, but we don't really have any data to prove it. But I will tell you a quote from a 52-year-old female head college coach who was let go, that her AD upon firing her said that she was irrelevant and out of touch with the student athletes. And they hired a younger, less experienced, and less expensive coach to replace her. And it is a common belief that older coaches, and I'd say old, 50 or older, which some of us in the audience can resonate with, is that this is typically when people think you're in your coaching prime. But these women are seldom rehired and enter the coaching carousel where their male colleagues do. There's not a lot of data on differently abled coaches or para-coaches, so I'm not going to talk about that. It's an area of research for any students out there who need a research question. But bias. There's been a lot of talk in the media about bias. Conscious and implicit bias. And we all have bias. It's just part of being a human being. Some of it we're aware of, and other is so unconscious that we don't even know how it affects our behaviors, our attitude, our perceptions, or our evaluations and expectations and interpretations of other people's behavior. And I want to give you some examples of what this might look like in coaching. So here's Gino Auriemma, and I'm using basketball pictures sort of for parallel reference. So here's Gino probably yelling at the ref. I'm assuming, I don't know, but it looks like that's what he's doing to me. Now here's Sherry Cole, the head women's basketball coach at Oklahoma. So you might think Gino's like, you know, he's doing his job, he's sticking up for his team, where Sherry might be like, you're whining. And here's Dawn Staley, we might perceive like she's being aggressive and shrill. Okay. So women coaches are really articulate about how they're treated by male referees. And this is not just true for basketball. One coach said, I recognize gender bias across sideline behavior by head coaches. I have male counterparts who can lay into officials, but if I get too negative or too animated, I will be told to clean it up. At one of our Women Coaches Academy, there was a 6'5", 6'6", she's really tall, basketball coach. And she's like, I like to wear heels on the sidelines. So she's like 6'7" or 6'8" on the sideline. She's a big woman, and she's imposing. And she's like, I like to wear heels, so that's just my thing. I said, you rock it. And she said she's often told by male referees to sit down because she's too imposing, and that she gets a lot more technicals for the same behaviors that her male colleagues do. We had a long conversation about that. So same thing with coaching behaviors. This is that kind of double standard, double bind. Here's Gino. He's coaching Maya Moore. He's coaching. Now we might think that Kim Mulkey is being mean, or that Nikki Caldwell is being dramatic and aggressive. Now these are just an example of what bias we all might think when we show these pictures, but I hope that maybe you were thinking about what your interpretations and evaluations were of these coaches, because this is how it plays out with bias. So we know that women coaches face a host of double standards, double binds, and gender bias. Some women coaches experience so many of these that they turn to legal remedies and sue their institutions. And women coaches are often very clear about talking about these double standards. And this very last bullet point is that often women who speak up for gender inequities within their departments for lack of resources or support are often penalized or fired because they're speaking up on behalf of their programs. One coach told me, there are clear Title IX issues at our institution. I feel like if I bring them up, I will be disposed of. All coaches of women's sports, men and women, feel the same. Second coach, I believe that you have to file a Title IX suit just to get equal, and she put that in caps, anything, and then you will never be employed again in any college realm. Unfortunately, there is some truth to that, easy for me to say, and we have had historical and current cases that are ongoing where women are claiming gender bias, discrimination, and harassment from the institution. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about some of these cases. So within the lawsuit that claims gender bias, it might sound like this. The athletic department causes a double standard by which female coaches must monitor their language and worry about keeping students and their parents happy, while male coaches are allowed to yell, curse, threaten, throw things, and be ejected from games and push student athletes to the edge of their abilities, even if it sometimes results in injury. Recently, there was a really comprehensive report done by the Women's Sport Foundation about gender bias, and I had the privilege of serving on the advisory panel for this report, and I can tell you it's worth looking at. You can download it online for free, and there are kind of two key takeaways for me with this report. First, it was a national data set with thousands of male and female coaches, which really added to what we knew, because what they were trying to prove was that gender bias was not just one coach filing a lawsuit at one institution, that this was a systemic problem in sport that needed to be addressed. And two, that men and women coaches perceived resources, inequities, and gender bias very differently than their male colleagues. In another report by the NCAA, women coaches of color were also very clear that they perceive and experience both racial and gender bias in college athletics. So that paints a really, I told you it would be dramatic and scary and bizarre. That is some of the data at the societal level. So where I really think it gets interesting is at the organizational level. And we have various factors that are influencing the barriers for women coaches at the organizational level. So some of you might not be familiar with these terms, so I'm just going to give you a brief definition and then show you data that complements each one of these points. So tokenism is the idea that if women are 15% or less of the workforce, they're a token. So if you have a coaching staff or a club that has 20 coaches and 2 are women, that's 10%, they would be a token. Okay. So marginalization is the idea that women are put to the margins or in positions or roles that are less important, less visible, and less lucrative. Homologous reproduction is the idea that people hire people like themselves. Okay. The other ones are pretty self-evident, but I wanted to give you those definitions before I show you the data so you can understand it. And when I get to what do we do about all of this, I'm going to reinforce the fact that organizational change, I think, is the biggest target of opportunity for making a difference in this coaching paradox. So here's a great example of tokenism and marginalization. Tokenism, you can see with the red line with female head coaches, this is a state-level youth soccer association. And you can see that as the kids get older, where soccer becomes competitive and promotion and relegation kicks in, and it becomes real soccer, those are other people's words, not mine, that you find fewer head coaches. And they are below 20 to 15%, so they are statistical tokens. Now, there's been some talk recently in the literature that there's this rule of 3. Like if you have 3 of any group, then they're not tokens anymore. So let's go back to this coaching staff of 20, and 2 are women, and you add 1. What's that percentage? 15, okay? So you can have 3 women and a coaching staff of 20, and there's still a token. So this rule of 3 might be a nice way of sort of thinking about this, but it doesn't really add up. Marginalization is where women are placed in roles that are less visible, less important, less powerful. And a colleague of mine, Mike Messner, who's a sports sociologist, wrote a book called It's All for the Kids. And he talked about the team manager as the team mom, that this is a gendered role in sport. And you can see that most of the women are in the team manager position. Another example of tokenism and marginalization in college sport to pro-women's soccer is as the position becomes more visible, more powerful, and more lucrative and more visible, you have fewer women in those positions. Women of color also report feeling like they're tokens and experience marginalization. This was a study done by Leslie Larson at University of Tennessee. This was actually her dissertation that she shared with me. But women, these black women assistant basketball coaches feel like they're pigeonholed into recruiting roles rather than tracked into head coaching roles. And that because they're often tokens in the workplace, they feel scrutinized and policed and feeling a lot of pressure to perform, which is classic psychosocial and occupational outcomes for women that we know from the research. So if you're a token in your workplace, we know from the research that you are more likely to experience these host of negative outcomes, and you will be more likely to burn out and quit, which is what we don't want. So that's another pitfall to keep in mind. Another pitfall is the gender wage gap. We know that in general society that women make about 80 cents on the dollar to men. That's even accounting for full-time, year-round employment. And at the rate it's closing, the AAUW predicts that it will be over 135 years until we have equal pay. I don't know about you, but I'm planning on being long gone by then. But what's important here is that this gender pay gap is also wider and deeper for women of color and older women. Again, back to that intersectional model. So what does this look like for coaches? I pulled this data from the Big Ten, since we're in the Big Ten. And you can do this as well. It's public data. And I mapped it out here. And you can see that I think that women, head coaches of women's teams, and that's where the women are. Now, there are men in that red line as well. That those coaches would be real happy to make 80 cents on the dollar to the coaches of the men's team. That's where that green dollar sign is. And what I find interesting, too, about this data is that assistant coaches for men's teams are paid almost as much as head coaches of women's teams. Now, somebody ran the math on this. It wasn't me. But accounting for college education, coaches of men's teams, which obviously is inflated by men's basketball and football, are paid 379% more than head coaches of women's teams. Told you it would be scary. In terms of limited upward mobility, so we talk a lot about the coaching pipeline. So you can not enter the pipeline, you can be stuck in the pipeline, or you don't have access to the most important positions. And this is some data that I have from the Women College Coaching Report Card that shows we have a lot of women entering at the entry level, graduate assistants and director of operations, but they're kind of stuck in the middle. And as the position becomes more visible, more power, and more lucrative, we have very few women. Now, speaking of athletic directors, and Mark's in the audience, so thanks for being here, Mark. And this is not to, shame all college athletic directors. This is a complicated system. But I want to paint the picture of why this matters to homologous reproduction. So you can see across the divisions that most of the athletic directors are male. Now, I think I saw Kim Chandler come in, so she's a female athletic director at Macalester. But the reason why this matters, again, who's in what positions and who is visible. So when we think of homologous reproduction, that people like to hire people like themselves, with the 4 years of data that I have from the coaching report card, you can see that out of all the coaching positions that have turned over in these 4 years, a majority of the hires are men. And a large majority of the people hiring those coaches are men. And in sociology, we call this homologous reproduction. You can say that one at your next cocktail party. Guess what I learned? Fancy sociological term. All right, so if you haven't been thoroughly depressed or scared or horrified yet, No, I don't have too much more, but it is sort of a dire picture. And that's why I think this model is important, because when people ask me what is going on, I can't just point to one thing. It's a lot of things happening simultaneously. At the interpersonal level, we often talk about the networking and the child and household labor, and that most women 9 times are more likely to say they do more household work and are 4 times more likely to say they do more childcare. So if you're that female assistant coach getting paid very little, and you're in a climate, and you love what you do, but you're having to do most of the domestic labor at home because maybe you have an unsupportive partner, and you can't afford childcare, and your athletic director won't bring your kids to practice, I'd cry in my laundry too. It's sad. And these are the stories that I hear from young women coaches who really want to stay in it, but it's oftentimes really challenging. So at the individual level, I've already talked about how intersectional identities influence that individual level, so I'm not going to spend any more time there. But what I do want to talk about is 3 things that I hear in the media, I hear from coaching directors and athletic directors, and I hear from women themselves, is that women are often framed of why we don't have women coaches as being there's not enough competent women coaches, women lack the confidence, and hey, you know, women have a free choice. They just are choosing not to coach. They have a lot of other things that they can do. So the problem with this is that you're placing the blame on the lack of women in the framework on the very people that don't have any power. And when you do that, when we blame women for the lack of women in those positions, and I've just spent all that time telling you about that system that influence their choices, that influence their perceptions, their behaviors, their attitudes, and their career trajectory, is that when we blame the women, that's easy. Well, they don't apply, they don't show up, they don't want to coach. Then what happens is we don't have to interrogate and change the structure that surrounds the women, and the status quo remains in place, which some argue privileges males. So this one really gets me going, but I'm gonna take a breath, because this is something I feel really passionate about. And the bias, this goes back to bias. So if I'm a coaching director and I have an implicit bias that I'm not aware of, and I want to hire a coach, and I get 20 applicants and 2 are women, and I go, well, I want to hire women, but the 2 I have are really, they're not even qualified, and I'd like to have more women in the pool, but if you believe that they're not going to apply, you're not going to pick up the phone and make the effort to recruit, find who the rising stars are, go out and get them and convince them that this is a good fit for them. So I think that, maybe there's some truth to some of these, but a lot of them are false narratives that keep getting repeated that put the blame on women and nothing changes. All right, so let's have everybody just quick stand up and stretch and just kind of shake off all that stuff, okay? Just stand up, stretch. Okay, good. Say hi to your neighbor. Hi, neighbor. Okay. So, oh, no, you don't get to sit down yet. Back up. Back up. Okay, so we're going to play a little game. Everybody has to be standing that's able and willing. So if this is true for you, you get to sit down. Okay? I am currently not a student in one of Dr. LaVoi's classes. I am currently not a student. If that's true for you, you get to sit down. Okay, this is my way of taking attendance. That's good. All right, you guys can sit down now. I see you in the back. All right. So let's talk about how do we get to parity. Change has to happen at every level. And so what's important about this slide, and you might have noticed that power arrow that I haven't really addressed, but to address change, you have to know at what level your strategy is aimed. And you have to be aware that at every level, the influence of power and its connections to gender. So due to its high visibility and widespread popularity, sport is a salient site of cultural production. That is, sport operates on a symbolic level, reflecting and transmitting shared cultural values. Among these values, sport helps define the attributes associated with leadership that we've been talking about, and thus, derivatively, power. When women are excluded from powerful social roles, both men and women are exposed to the male-dominant realm of sport and internalize the dominant vision of power as a masculine trait. So the bidirectional arrow is important because it symbolizes that for change to occur, we need change coming from the power structures, and who controls sport needs to change from the top down. And that individual coaches, however, women ourselves, have the individual power and agency to create change from the bottom up. When women understand the system within they coach, they are in a better equipped position to act with power and to challenge blaming narratives rather than be acted upon as a passive subject. And I can tell you, when I talk to women coaches and I show them this model, and I always feel kind of bad because I'm like, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is kind of your reality. They thank me. They thank me. They're like, thank you for showing me this. I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one experiencing these things. This is actually not about me. This is way bigger than me. So now I have a better framework for which to understand what I'm facing as a coach. And to me, that is one of the most powerful reasons why I do what I do. So at the individual level, we can have professional development. It's not about the X's and O's, but teaching women how to thrive in the occupational landscape that they exist in. Persistence, grit, confidence, how to face adversity, and how to respond. At the interpersonal level, we need to develop and support and mentor women. Women need to mentor and support other women, and we also need to rely on our male allies and turn to them as well. We need to build a strong network. That's one of the things women say, we don't have a network. Well, that's on us. We can do that. So the interpersonal individual levels are the ones that we have the most control over. So that's usually where most of the strategies are targeted because we can do something about that. We can have coaching clinics. We can build a network. And a group that's really good at that right now is the Alliance of Women Coaches, on which Dr. Kane said I serve on the advisory board. So there are groups that are doing really good things. The Women Coaches Academy, which are funded by the NCAA. We have 3 a year with 50 women, and it's all women taught by all women faculty. Because that's another thing women tell us, is that they want an all-female space where they feel supported and safe. And so those are occurring. And they are life-changing and transformative to the women who attend. So if there are some college coaches in the audience who haven't attended, please apply. Regionally, we do a Women Coaches Symposium. It will have our 4th year. Next April, some of you in the room have been to this. It's quickly becoming a can't-miss event, where we have a day of professional development, networking, and community building. And I'm really excited to announce the keynote speaker for the 2017 symposium. The Jean K. Freeman keynote speaker for 2017 is Jill Ellis. She is it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. She, if you don't know, is the U.S. national women's soccer team head coach, and they're currently in camp right now. I think they're playing Switzerland or something. So if you know people that like to attend, please encourage them. So the bullseye. Let's really talk about organizational change as we head into the home stretch. There are lots of things that I could talk about, but I picked two. One, what I really think needs to happen in people that hire, search committees, anybody involved with hiring coaches need to undergo bias training. They're doing this in corporate, and what they know is when people undergo bias training, it results in a more diverse workforce, which improves the outcomes for everybody. To my knowledge, and I don't know if this is true or not, I believe this is not happening at any level of athletics in any systematic form. So I think that's a real opportunity. The second thing is to hold decision makers accountable, and this is a broad umbrella. Accountable for equal pay, accountable for family-friendly policies, accountable for hiring, accountable for creating an inclusive and tolerant workplace climate for women and all their different intersectional identities. And one of the things that we do at the Tucker Center is to hold people accountable as we do our report card. We'll be in the 5th year of the report card this fall. And what we do is we give a grade to institutions based on the percentage of women coaching women, the head coaches. A through F, just like the students get, okay? I give them a grade, and the institution gets a grade, the sport gets a grade, and the conference gets a grade. And I can tell you in 5 years of this report, with the Division I data, we've given out a lot more Ds and Fs than we have As and Bs. So we have some room for improvement. We also have data, Division II and III, and Alexa, Jane, and Lindsay are currently working on collecting data for junior colleges and NAIA. So we're expanding our report cards because the purpose of them is to track change, stimulate dialogue between sports stakeholders, and create social change. You have to have the data to know if it's changing. That's why that first graph about Acosta and Carpenter is so powerful, because you can see it. So what we like to do with the report card, this is an infographic somebody else made, is we want to celebrate those who are doing it well, and there are some, and hold those laggards down at the bottom responsible. I think one of my favorite calls that I got as a result of this report card came from a AD that had an F. And this AD called me quite angry that we had counted their coaches wrong, and therefore they should actually be a low D. I can't make that up. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I got the data wrong. I'm sorry, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, no, it's right. And then I hung up and I go, that's exactly why we're doing the report card. I want them to be aware. I don't want them to be happy with an F. And if, progress would be a D, well, that's something. Now, we also have the 0% club. We don't have any right now, but we've had 2 that are in this club, and what I find really eerie is that their mascots have weird similarities. Including their brandishment of weapons. Can't make it up. All right, so in terms of accountability, the media has been really great in terms of highlighting this underrepresentation and decline and giving our report card some legs in the national media, including outlets such as ESPN and USA Today. And I really thought I had hit the jackpot when the report card was on the cover of USA Today right next to Leonardo. I'm like, I'm done. I've made it. And actually, a shout out to Christine Brennan, who is pictured here. It was her suggestion that we do a report card. And so she said, people pay attention to report cards. And I thought, that's not really academic. She's like, do it. I go, okay, so I did. And we still are, and she was right. So the good news is that, and I would like to think, and this is not cause and effect, but I would like to think that the report card is making a difference. So at the Division I level, last year we almost went up 1 full percentage point of women, head coaches of women's teams. So we'll see what happens. We'll collect the next round in November. I know from talking to people that the report card comes up on search committees, in trustee meetings, in president's meetings, and in conference meetings. And so the report card is present, which is, I think, a really good thing. The last thing in terms of organizational change is to learn from diversity champions, those schools that are getting A's and B's. I always get the question, what are those schools doing that have an A and B? Because again, if you're with the blaming narrative, oh, I can't find women, they don't apply, there's not enough qualified women, I'm like, how can they possibly have an A? So I said, I have no idea what they're doing, but now I will, because we got some funding from the NCAA Office of Inclusion, and I have been interviewing these A and B athletic directors, and we'll have a best practices, and I can tell you that it is really interesting. We're gonna have some great best practices from these interviews. I'm super excited to share that with you, so that will be coming out in 2017. Fortunately, there are a lot of groups and organizations, including the Tucker Center, that are fighting for change at every level. And luckily for us, we have really strong and collaborative relationships with almost every group on the screen that you see behind me. So we're not alone, and there's a lot of work to be done. So in summary, those 3 questions, we've talked about why women coaches matter. We've talked about the system and how the target of opportunity might be at the organizational level, and that we really all need to work together to create the change that needs to happen. And I do believe that working for a world that is good for women is good for everybody. So my hope is in the next generation, we go from women coaches occupying a minority in the coaching landscape to women once again dominating the coaching landscape. Thank you. So we have a little time for some Q&A, and we have Anna and Caroline who have some mics. So if you have a question, we are taping this, so we need you to speak into the microphone, and I'll do my best to answer your question. Yes, and following the Q&A, we do have a small reception in the lobby with snacks. My students know about the snacks, so they're like, snacks. We'll have snacks and non-alcoholic beverages in the lobby, so please stick around. So who has a question? Oh, this is a twist. My student asking me a question. I like it. Go ahead, Matea.
So you addressed all the levels up to organizational, but I was curious why you didn't address societal.
I was wondering who was going to notice that. This is why we have Matea in the Tucker Center. She's real smart. So I didn't put that up there because that level of change is the hardest to address, and I didn't really have time to get into the depth of that. But as we talk about awareness and we educate and we work for change together with organizations, you know, as we like to say in sport in a diverse society, that society and sport mirror one another, is that when we look at these changes in society, they will probably trickle down to sport. So changing sexism and homophobia and gender bias and all those things in that ring really have a lot to do with things outside of sport as well as in sport. So that's the short answer. We've got one close here, Anna, so grab this one, and then Caroline, you can come down.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for doing this research. It's amazing, and it's incredibly depressing. And my question for you is, as I look at all of your different levels, I wonder, how often have you seen capitalism affecting each of those levels? And have you studied what is the role of capitalism and the dearth of women coaches?
It's a great question. I think it is in part related. Some people say that as women went from basically volunteer coaches in the early 70s to paid coaches, men were now interested in coaching women. So there's one explanation. The other explanation in terms of that pay gap is that we have, the college arms race, which is driving up coaching salaries for men's teams. That's, unarguable. So it's really hard for athletic directors to kind of narrow that pay gap when there's all this pressure to hire the best coaches and pay them well so the team will win, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of it has to do with capitalism.
Over here. So we've spent all this time talking about women coaching women,
Yep.
right? And the big thing is, like, before Title IX, you had this 90% of women coaching women because men didn't care about the teams. So do you think there's any world in which women could infiltrate men's sports and start to become men's coaches? And is that possible, A? And B, would that incite change a little faster?
That's a great question, Holly. Great question. So what I didn't say is that across that same time span with the Acosta and Carpenter, the decline, is that we saw no improvement of women coaching men. So it's at 2%. 1972 was 2%, and today it's 2%. So while men now have a dual career pathway to coach men or women, women lost ground in coaching women and wasn't open up to coaching men. So is it possible? Yes. And I think, and I get this question a lot from the media, when we had the recent hirings of women in men's professional sports, Becky Hammond, Nancy Lieberman, Jen Welter, Don Braid in hockey, Justine Siegel in the MLB, is that, again, if we go back to this argument that it matters when we see women in positions of power in sport, and men's sport, which is arguably the most visible and powerful, then that may open up the floodgates, or it may not. It's too early to tell, but I do think that seeing those women in those positions is a positive thing because it tells people like, oh, that's possible. I'd like to coach men. And I really would love to see more women coaching boys and men. We have a few in the room that do that, and they make a big difference in the lives of those men. Because same-sex role models are important. And almost, I would say 100%, but we had an argument in the Tucker Center that I couldn't say 100% because the data wasn't there. I'm like, okay, so nearly 100% of boys and men get a same-sex role model. They're coached by men, and that's great. I would never take that away, but a lot of girls and women today in their sport experience never have a women coach. I was one of those included. In my tennis career, I never had a female coach. So while same-sex role models are important, so are opposite-sex role models. So we need more of that. And I always tell women, apply to coach men and boys. If you're doubling your job opportunities, go for it. So it's a good question. We'll go here, and then we'll go to Dr. Kane, if we have time.
That's the story of my life, actually.
All right, short question, maybe a long answer. As you've conducted all this work and gotten all this, wisdom and insight and experience on this, what's the biggest source of resistance you've encountered in doing this work?
That's a great question. Thanks for calling me that I had wisdom, too. Boy, the biggest source of resistance, I would say it's twofold. One is I get resistance from those in positions of power that are resistant to start the dialogue. So I'm not saying like, hey, you're a bad, evil person. Let's talk about it. What's going on? What are your experiences? And some people are very open to that, to talking, and others aren't. And I think the other is women coaches themselves sometimes are resistant. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Oh, Dr. Kane.
Dr. LaVoi, so Have you thought at all about seeing if and I don't even know if this could be possible, and maybe Mark Coyle could also help answer this. I know he'd love to be put on the spot, as well as Joel Maturi, who's sitting next to him. What about the idea of having the NCAA push for something like the Rooney Rule? Mm-hmm. And maybe you could explain, because not everybody in here maybe knows what the Rooney Rule is. But I mean, would that be doable? Would that make sense? Mm-hmm. Is it legally okay to do? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, that would be one way to institutionalize the opportunity for a female to at least be part of the pool that gets interviewed.
Yes. So there's a lot of discussion right now in the NCAA about instituting a Rooney Rule for hiring of coaches. So the Rooney Rule, if you don't know, is an NFL rule that stated that for every open, I think head coaching position only, that there had to be a person of color in the final candidate pool. Not that you had to hire that person, but you had to have a diverse pool. And it actually led to more head coaches being coaches of color in the NFL, so it worked. So there's been a lot of talk to say, why don't we have a similar rule? I don't know what we'd call it. The LaVoi rule might stick. No. Buy my book, no. But I think if women aren't in the final pool, there's 0% likelihood they're going to be hired. So I think it is a way to meet that goal. And a lot of athletic directors will tell me that they really want to hire a woman. So maybe this would be a little nudge in the right direction. And I actually think, because I've talked to some people in the NCAA, that this is sort of on the table right now. And if that happens, I think that will be a good thing. And I'd really like to go out on a limb and say you'd have to have a female in every open coaching position, including coaching boys and men. But that might be a little radical. So I'll leave that one. Okay, let me check the watch here. Do we have time for one more question? Okay. Okay, yep, we got one and then here.
Yeah, what do you see as, what can men who are coaching right now, how can they support the increase of women coaching?
That's a great question. So I hope I didn't paint the picture that, all men are the evil empire of Darth Vader, okay? There are a lot of great men out there that care very deeply about this and that are real allies. And so one concrete strategy that men could do is hire women, mentor women, coach women, and be an advocate for them. And when we have our coaching symposium, we do have a few male allies that come every year who are coaching directors or conference commissioners. And so, yes, for social change to happen, you need an equal and opposite reaction, right? Social change doesn't happen with just women only doing women-only things. We need to enlist the men as well as allies.
So my question's kind of opposite to hers.
Okay.
Do you find throughout your research that women or females that are in the position of power to hire, not breaking the trend and not advocating for other women to become in the position?
We see that a lot. And if we look at the research, women in positions of power that are hiring are also tokens. And so oftentimes we see that women in those positions adopt the decision-making patterns of the men in those positions because they don't want to be seen as a feminist advocate for hiring women or a majority of women because they will get sanctioned, harassed, discriminated against, and all the things we talked about. So yes, we do see that. But we also have some women that are very staunch advocates like, I want to hire women. What I find interesting about that question, though, is if a male athletic director hires a male, nobody's like, now why are you hiring people like yourself? What agenda do you have, right? We don't think twice about it, but if you have a woman hiring predominance of women, the eyebrow gets raised. And that's part of this gendered stereotypical sexist system that I sort of laid out? That's a really good question. So sometimes women aren't our biggest advocates, is the short answer. Okay. Do you have one too, Anna? Okay, let's go one more.
Hi. We've talked in class before about how like sport, like the income, I guess, overall of what a team brings in, like, and it's actually amazing, like, to see like that not many teams actually come in the positive. When you showed the graph of the coaches and how much they get paid, how much does that factor into what the team actually brings in?
I think I understand your question. So one of the arguments that is often made is that we can pay male coaches of basketball and football more because they bring in money, right? That's correct. Oh, who's your professor? Dr. Kane, are you a plant? Planted him. Okay, so yeah, we know out of FBS schools, the current data, I think it's 23 or 24 schools out of that FBS pool actually make a profit. Okay, a lot of them bring in money, but they don't make a profit. So what's interesting about coaching salaries, and this is going a little bit outside my expertise, but a Title IX colleague of mine, Nancy Hogshead, does a lot of work in this area. And I asked her this question: how can people justify paying the men's coaches more than the women's coaches? And she said, you can't. You can't segment the market. It's one market. You can't have a market for coaches of women's teams and a market for coaches of men's teams. The only way you can do that, if you can segment the occupational pay, is if the men's teams are bringing in money, which isn't very many. And only if the women's teams are getting equal resources in terms of marketing and promotions and support to be successful. So it's a really good question. Back to the capitalist question over there. It's all about the money, unfortunately. Okay, I'm going to check my watch here. Unless someone has a really burning question that they just can't go home without asking, I think we'll wrap it up. I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's been my honor. Have a good night.